Continuing where I left off, Chapter 12. In the evening, Prince Andrei and Pierre got into a calash and drove to Bold Hills. Prince Andrei, glancing at Pierre now and then, broke the silence with remarks that showed he was in a good humor. Pointing to the fields, he told him of the improvement he was making in his husbandry. Pierre preserved a morose silence, or answered in a monosyllables, apparently immersed in his own thoughts. He was thinking that Prince Andrei was in error and did not see the true light, and that he, Pierre, ought to come to his aid to enlighten and uplift him. But no sooner had he thought out what he should say and how to say it, than he foresaw that Prince Andrei, with one word, a single argument, would discredit all his teachings, and he was afraid to begin, afraid to expose to possible ridicule what he cherished and held sacred. What is it that you think like that? Why is it that you think like that? Pierre suddenly began, lowering his head and looking like a bull about to charge. What makes you think that way? You ought not to think. Think that way about what? Asked Andrei in surprise. About life, about man's destiny. It cannot be so. I myself thought like that, and do you know what saved me? Freemasonry. No, don't smile. Masonry is not a religious, ritualistic sect, as I used to think. It is the unique expression of the highest, the eternal aspects of mankind. And he began to expound Freemasonry to Prince Andrei as he understood it. He said that Freemasonry was the teachings of Christianity, free from the fetters of state and church, a teaching of fraternity, equality, love. Only our holy brotherhood has real meaning in life. All the rest is a dream, said Pierre. Understand, my dear fellow, that outside this fellowship all is filled with error and deception, and I agree with you that an intelligent and good man has no alternative but to live out of his life, like you, trying only to avoid doing harm. But make our fundamental convictions your own. Enter our brotherhood. Give yourself up to us. Let yourself be guided, and you will at once feel, as I did, that you are a part of the vast, indivisible chain, the beginning of which is hidden in heaven, said Pierre. Prince Andrei, looking straight in front of him, listened in silence to Pierre. Several times, when he failed to catch a word owing to the rumble of carriage wheels, he asked Pierre to repeat it. By the peculiar light that glowed in Prince Andrei's eyes and by his silence, Pierre saw that he had not spoken in vain, that Prince Andrei would not interrupt him nor laugh at what he said. They came to a river that had overflowed its banks, across which they had to be ferried. They stepped out into the raft, and while the horses and carriages were being placed on it, Prince Andrei leaned on the rail and gazed in silence at the floodwaters glittering in the sun. Well, what do you think about it? Pierre asked. Why are you silent? What do I think? I was listening to you. That's all very well, said Prince Andrei. You say, join our brotherhood, and we will show you the purpose of life, many destinies, and the laws that govern the universe. But who is this we? Men? How is it you know everything? Why do I alone not see what you see? You see a reign of truth and goodness on earth. But I don't see it. Pierre interrupted him. Do you believe in a future life? He asked. A future life, repeated Prince Andrei. But Pierre gave him no time to answer, and took this repetition of his words for a denial, the more readily as he knew Prince Andrei's former aesthetic convictions. You say that you cannot see a reign of truth and goodness on earth. Nor could I, and it cannot be seen if we regard our life here as the end of everything. On earth, here on this earth, Pierre pointed in the fields, there is no truth. All is evil and deception. But in the universe, in the whole universe, there is a kingdom of truth, and we who are now the children of the earth are, in the eternal sense, children of the universe. Do not feel in my soul that I am part of the vast, harmonious whole. Do not feel that I constitute one link, one step from the lower to the higher beings in this infinite multiple of beings in which the Godhead, the supreme power, if you prefer, is manifest. If I see clearly see the ladder leading from plant to man, then why should I suppose that this ladder, the beginning of which I cannot discern below me, why should I suppose that it breaks off with me and does not go farther and farther up to the higher beings? I feel not only that I cannot vanish, since nothing in the world vanishes, but that I shall always exist, always have existed. I feel that beside myself, above me, there are spirits, and in the world there is truth. Yes, that is Herder's theory, observed Prince Andrei, but it's not that, my dear fellow, which will convince me. Life and death, that is what convinces. What convinces is when you see a being dear to you, whose life is bound up with yours, to whom you have done a wrong you had hoped to expiate. Prince Andrei's voice trembled and he turned away, and all at once this being is suffering in agony and ceases to exist. Why? There must be an answer, and I believe there is. That is what convinces. That is what has convinced me, said Prince Andrei. Yes, of course, said Pierre. Isn't that just what I am saying? No. All I say is that it is not arguments that persuade one of the necessity of a future life, but this. When in life you go hand in hand with someone, and suddenly that person vanishes, there, into nowhere, and you yourself are left facing that abyss, looking down into it. And I did look into it. Well, that's it then. You know that there is there, and there is a someone. There is the future life. The someone is God. Prince Andrei did not reply. The carriage and horses had long since been taken off in harness. The sun had sunk half below the horizon, and an evening frost was starring the pools near the ferry. But to the amazement of the footmen, coachmen, and ferrymen, Pierre and Prince Andrei continued to stand on the raft and talk. If there is a God and a future life, there is truth, there is goodness, and a man's highest happiness consists in striving to attain them. We must live there, we must love, and we must believe not only that we live today on this scrap of earth, but that we have lived and shall live forever, there in the whole, said Pierre, pointing to the sky. Prince Andrei stood leaning on the railing of the raft, listening to Pierre, his gaze fixed on the red reflection of the sun on the blue waters. Pierre felt silent. All was still. The raft had long since reached the shore, and the only sound was the gentle ripple of the current against it below. It seemed to Prince Andrei that the lapping of the water kept up a refrain to Pierre's words. It is the truth. Believe it. Prince Andrei sighed, and with a radiant, childlike, tender look, glanced at Pierre's face, flushed and rapturous, though still shyly sensible of his friend's superiority. Yes, if only it were so, said Prince Andrei. However, let's get into the carriage, he added, and stepping off the ferry, he looked up at the sky to which Pierre had pointed, and for the first time since Austerlitz saw those lofty, eternal heavens he had seen while lying on the battlefield, and something that had long been slumbering in him, something that was best in him, suddenly awoke, joyous and youthful in his soul. As soon as he returned to the ordinary conditions of life, it vanished. But he was aware that this feeling, which he did not know how to develop, existed within him. Pierre's visit marked an epoch in Prince Andrei's life. Though outwardly he continued to live in the same way, inwardly a new life began for him. Chapter 13. It was growing dark by the time Prince Andrei and Pierre drove up to the front entrance of the house at Bald Hills. As they approached the house, Prince Andrei, with a smile, drew Pierre's attention to the commotion going on at the back porch. A bent little old woman with a wallet on her back and a short, long-haired young man in a black garment had rushed back to the gate on seeing the carriage. Two women ran out after them, and all four, looking round at the carriage, ran up the steps of the back porch looking scared. Those are some of my sister's God folks, said Prince Andrei. They mistook us for my father. This is the one matter in which she disobeys him. He gives her orders for these pilgrims to be driven away, but she receives them. But what are God's folks? Asked Pierre. Prince Andrei had no time to answer him. The servants came out to meet him, and he inquired where the old prince was and whether he was expected home soon. The old prince was still in town, but was expected back at any minute. Prince Andrei led Pierre to his own apartments, which were always kept in perfect order and readiness for him in his father's house, and he himself went to the nursery. "Let us go to my sister," he said on rejoining Pierre. "I have not seen her yet. She is hidden away, sitting with her God's folk. Serve her right. She'll be embarrassed, but you will see her God's folks. It's really very curious. But what are these God's folk? You shall see." Prince Marya was indeed disconcerted at seeing them, and red patches appeared on her face. In her cozy room, with lamps burning before the icon stand, a youth with a long nose and long hair, wearing a monk's cassock, sat beside her on the sofa, behind the samovar. Near them, in an armchair, sat a thin, shriveled old woman with a meek expression on her childish face. "Andrei, why didn't you let me know?" said Princess Marya with mild reproach as she stood up in front of her pilgrims like a hen before her chicks. "Delighted to see you. I am very glad to see you," she said to Pierre in French as he kissed her hand. She had known him as a child, and now his friendship with Andrei, his unhappy marriage, and above all his kindly, simple face, disposed her favorably toward him. She looked at him with her beautiful, luminous eyes, as if to say, "I like you very much, but please don't laugh at my little flock." After the first exchange of greetings, they sat down. "Ah, and Ivanushka is here too," said Prince Andrei with a smile at the young pilgrim. "Andrei," said Princess Marya imploringly. "You must realize that this is a woman," said Prince Andrei to Pierre in French. "Andrei, for heaven's sake!" exclaimed Prince Marya again. It was plain that Prince Andrei's ironical attitude toward the pilgrims and Princess Marya's helpless attempts to protect them had become an established habit in their relations. "But, my dear girl," said Prince Andrei, still in French, "you ought to be grateful to me for giving Pierre some explanation of your intimacy with this young man." "Indeed?" remarked Pierre, peering through his spectacles with curiosity and seriousness, for which Princess Marya felt particularly grateful to him, into Ivanushka's face, who, realizing that he was the subject of their talk, surveyed them all with cunning eyes. Prince Marya's embarrassment on her flock's account was quite unnecessary. They were not in the least abashed. The old woman, lowering her eyes, but casting sidelong glances at the newcomers, had turned her cup upside down in the saucer with a nibbled bit of sugar beside it, and sat quietly in her armchair waiting to be offered another cup of tea. Ivanushka, sipping out of the saucer, looked from under her brows, casting sly, effeminate glances at the young man. "Where have you been, in Kiev?" Prince Andrei asked the old woman. "I have, master," answered the talkative old woman. "Just at Christmas time I was deemed worthy to partake of the holy, heavenly sacrament at the shrine of the saints. But now I've come from Kolyazin, master, where a great blessing has been revealed. Was Ivanushka with you?" "I go by myself, benefactor," said Ivanushka, trying to speak in a bass voice. "It was only at Yukhonovo that I fell in with Pavlograd." Pavlograd interrupted her companion. She was evidently anxious to tell what she had seen. In Kolyazin, master, a great blessing has been revealed." "What is it? Some new relics?" asked Prince Andrei. "Come, Andrei, that's enough," said Princess Marya. "Don't tell him, Pavlograd." "And why not, dearie? Why shouldn't I tell him? I like him. He is kind. He is one of God's chosen and my benefactor. He once gave me 10 roubles, I remember. When I was in Kiev, crazy Korushka says to me, he's one of God's own, goes barefoot summer or winter. Why, he says, don't you go to the right place? Go you to Kolyazin, where a wonder-working icon of the Holy Mother of God has been revealed. Hearing these words, I bid farewell to the holy folk, and off I go." All were silent. Only the pilgrim woman talked on in measured tones, audibly drawing her breath. "So I arrived there, master, and the people say to me, a great blessing has been revealed. Drops of chrism trickle from the cheeks of the Holy Virgin, Mother of God." All right, you can tell me all about it later," said Princess Marya, flushing. Let me ask her something, said Pierre. Do you see it yourself? He inquired. To be sure, master, I was found worthy. Such a brightness was on the face, like the light of heaven, and from the Holy Mother's cheek one drop after another. But of course it's a hoax, said Pierre naively, after listening intently to the pilgrims. Oh, master, what are you saying? Exclaimed Pavlograd, aghast, and turning to Princess Marya for support. That's how they deceive the people, he repeated. Lord Jesus Christ, cried the pilgrim, crossing herself. Oh, don't speak so, master. There was once a general who didn't believe, and he said monks are frauds, and he no sooner said it than he was struck blind. And he had a dream, and in his dream the Holy Mother of the Kiev catacombs comes to him and says, Believe in me, and I will make you whole. And so he kept besieging. Take me to her. Take me to her. It's the gospel truth that I'm telling you. I saw it with my own eyes, so they led him, blind as he was, straight to her. And he goes up and falls on his knees and says, Make me whole, he says, and I will give thee what the Tsar bestowed on me. And I saw it myself, master. The star set fright in her. Well, he regained his sight. It's a sin to speak so. God will punish you, she said admonishingly to Pierre. And how did that star get into the icon? Asked Pierre. And was the Holy Mother made a general? Asked Prince Andrei with a smile. Pavlograd suddenly turned pale and clasped her hands. Master, master, what a sin! And you who have a son, she exclaimed, her pallor turning to a vivid red. God forgive you, master, for what you have said. She crossed herself. Lord, forgive him. What does it mean, dearie? She said, turning to Princess Marya. She got up and, almost crying, began to arrange her wallet. She was visibly frightened and ashamed of having accepted charity in a house where such things could be said, yet sorry that she must henceforth forego the bounty of this house. Now, what did you want to do that for? Said Princess Marya. Why did you come to my room? Come, Pavlograd. I was only joking, said Pierre. Princess, I gave you my word, and I did not mean to offend her, he said to Princess Marya in French. Don't think any more about it. I was joking, said smiling shyly and trying to make amends for his offense. Pavlograd paused doubtfully, but Pierre's face wore a look of such sincere penitence, and Prince Andrei's expression was so serious and benign as he looked now at Pierre, now at her, that she was gradually reassured. Chapter 14. The pilgrim woman was appeased, and being encouraged to talk, told them at length about Father Ivanushka, who led such a saintly life that his hands smelt of incense, and how on her last pilgrimage to Kiev some monks of her acquaintance had given her the keys to the catacombs, and taking some dry bread with her, she had spent 2 days and 2 nights in the catacombs among the saints. I say a prayer to one, ponder a while, and go on to another. Then I have a little nap, and again go and kiss the holy relics. And such peace, dearie, such blessedness, that a body has no wish to come out even into God's world again. Pierre gravely and attentively listened to her. Prince Andrei went out of the room, and leaving God's folk to finish their tea, Princess Marya led Pierre into the drawing room. You are very kind, she said to him. Oh, I really didn't mean to hurt her feelings. I understand them so well and have the greatest respect for them. Princess Marya, smiling tenderly, looked at him in silence. I have known you for a long time, you see, and I love you like a brother, she said. How do you find Andrei? She asked hurriedly, not giving him time to respond to her expression of affection. I am very anxious about him. His health was better in the winter, but last spring his wound reopened, and the doctor said he ought to go away and have proper treatment. And I am also very much afraid for him spiritually. He is not a nature to suffer, and like us women, find relief in tears. He keeps it all within him. Today he is cheerful and animated, but that is the effect of your visit. He is not often like this. If you can only persuade him to go abroad. He needs activity, and this quiet, regular life is very harmful to him. Others don't notice it, but I see it. Toward 10 o'clock, hearing the bells of the old prince's approaching carriage, the footman rushed to the entrance. Pierre and Prince Andrei also went out to the steps. Who's that? Asked the old prince, catching sight of Pierre as he got out of the carriage. Ah, glad to see you. Kiss me, he said, on seeing who the young stranger was. The old prince was in good spirits and very cordial to Pierre. When Prince Andrei went into his father's study before supper, he found him in a hot dispute with his visitor. Pierre was maintaining that a time would come when there would be no more war. The old prince chaffingly took issue with him, but without losing his temper. "Drain the blood from men's veins and fill them with water. Then there'll be no more war. Old women ravings, he said, but he patted Pierre affectionately on the shoulder and went over to the table where Prince Andrei, evidently not wishing to join the conversation, was looking through the papers his father had brought from town. Going up to him, the old prince began to talk of business matters. "The marshal, Count Rostov, hasn't sent half his contingent. Came to town, saw fit to invite me to dinner. I gave him quite a time. And here, have a look at this." "Well, my boy," he said to his son as he clapped Pierre on the shoulder. "Fine fellow, your friend. I like him. Stirs me up. Some people talk sense, and you don't care to listen, but he talks nonsense and stirs up an old fellow like me. Well, go along now," he said. "Perhaps I'll come out and sit with you a while at supper. We'll have another argument. Make friends with my little dunce, Princess Marya," he shouted through the door after Pierre. It was only now, on his visit to Bald Hills, that Pierre fully appreciated the strength and charm of his friendship with Prince Andrei. This charm manifested itself not so much in relations with Prince Andrei himself, as in his relations with all his family and household. Though he hardly knew them, Pierre at once felt like an old friend both with the stern old prince and the gentle, timid Princess Marya, and they all liked him from the first. Not only did Princess Marya, who had been won by his kindness to his pilgrims, turn her most luminous gaze on him, but the little-year-old Prince Nikolai, as his grandfather called him, smiled at Pierre and let him take him in his arms. Mikhail Ivanitch and Mademoiselle Brunel looked on with delighted smiles when Pierre was in conversation with the old prince. It was clearly on Pierre's account that the old prince came into supper, and during the 2 days that Pierre was at Bald Hills, he was extremely cordial and told him to come and visit them again. When Pierre had gone, all the members of the family came together and began to discuss, as people always do after the departure of a new friend, but as rarely happens, no one had anything but good to say of him. Chapter 15. Returning from his leave, Rostov for the first time felt and fully realized how strong were the ties that bound him to Desnov and the whole regiment. As he drew near to the regiment, he experienced a sensation akin to what he had felt on nearing his home in Pavlograd Street, and when he caught sight of the first hussar in the unbuttoned uniform of his regiment, when he recognized the red-headed Dmitriev, saw the picket ropes of the chestnut horses, heard Lavrashka's gleefully shout to his master, "The Count has come!" and when the disheveled Denisov, who had been asleep on his bed, ran out of the mud hut to embrace him, and the officers gathered around to greet the new arrival, Rostov felt exactly as he had felt when his mother and father and sisters had embraced him. And he was so choked by tears of joy that he could not speak. The regiment, too, was home to him, a home as unalterably dear and precious as his parental home. After reporting himself to his colonel and being reassigned to his former squadron, after taking his turn as officer of the day and going for forage, after entering into all the little interests of the regiment and feeling that he was again divested of his liberty and revivited to a single, narrow, inflexible frame, Rostov experienced the same sense of peace and moral support, the same sense of being at home in his proper place as he had felt under the parental roof. There was none of that confusion of the world at large in which he was uncertain of his right place and made mistakes in his exercising choice. There was no Sonia with whom he ought or not to have an understanding. There was no possibility of going to either one place or another. There was not those 24 hours in the day that could be spent in such a variety of ways, nor those vast crowds of people, not one of whom was any closer to him than another. There was none of those vague and undefined money matters that his father, and nothing to remind him of that terrible loss to Dolokhov. Here in the regiment, everything was clear and simple. The whole world was divided into two unequal parts. One, our Pavlograd regiment, the other, all the rest. And the rest was no concern of his. In the regiment, everything was definite. Who was a lieutenant? Who was a captain? Who was a good fellow? Who was not? And above all, who was a comrade? The canteen keeper gave one credit. One pay came every 4 months. There was nothing to be thought out or decided. One had only to refrain from doing anything that was considered bad in the Pavlograd regiment, and when given an order to do what was clearly, distinctly, and definitely commanded, all would be well. Having once more entered into these explicit conditions of regimental life, Rostov felt the joy and relief a weary man feels on lying down to rest. Life in the regiment during this campaign was even more comforting to Rostov because after his gambling loss to Dolokhov, for which in spite all his family efforts to console him, he could not forgive himself. He had made up his mind to atone for his fault by serving not as he had done before, but really well, and by being an absolutely first-rate comrade and officer. In other words, an altogether splendid man, a thing that seemed so difficult out in the world, but so possible in the regiment. He had determined to repay his gambling loss to his parents within 5 years. They had formerly sent him 10,000 a year. Now he resolved to take only 2,000 and leave the remainder to repay the debt to his parents. After repeated retreats and attacks, and the battles at Putsk and Prussia-Elu, our army was concentrated near Bartenstein, awaiting the arrival of the Tsar and the beginning of a new campaign. The Pavlograd regiment, which belonged to the part of the army that had served in the 1805 campaign, had been brought up to the full strength in Russia, and arrived too late to take part in the first actions of the campaign. The Pavlograds had not been at Putinsk nor at Prussia-Elu, and when they joined the field army in the second half of the campaign, they were attached to Platov's detachment. Platov's detachment was acting independently of the main army. Several times, Pavlograd units had taken part in skirmishes with the enemy and had taken prisoners, and once even captured Marshal Aldenit's carriages. In April, the Pavlograd hussars were stationed near to totally devastated and deserted German village, where they remained for several weeks without moving. A thaw had set in. It was muddy and cold. The ice on the river broke, and roads became impassable. For several days neither provisions for the men nor fodder for the horses had been issued. As no transports could get through, the soldiers dispersed throughout the abandoned, desolate villages searching for potatoes, but even these were scarce. Everything had been eaten up, and the inhabitants had all fled. If any remained, they were worse than beggars, and there were nothing to be taken from them. Even the soldiers, although little given to pity, instead of taking advantage of them, often gave them the last of their rations. The Pavlograd regiment had lost only 2 men wounded in action, but famine and sickness had reduced their number by almost half. In the hospitals, death was so certain that soldiers suffering from fever or the distension resulting from bad food preferred to remain on duty, and, hardly able to drag their legs, went to the front rather than go to a hospital. With the coming of spring, the soldiers found a plant just showing above ground that looked like asparagus, which for some reason they called Mashka's sweet wort, and they wandered about the meadows and fields hunting for this Mashka's sweet wort, which was very bitter, digging it up with their sabers and eating it, despite the order not to eat the nauseous plant. That spring a new disease broke out among the soldiers, a swelling of the arms, legs, and face, which the doctor attributed to eating this root. But prohibitions notwithstanding, the soldiers of Denisov's squadron fed chiefly on Mashka's sweet wort because it was the second week of doling out the last of the rusk at the rate of half a pound to a man, and the last allotment of potatoes had sprouted and frozen. The horses too had subsided for 2 weeks on straw from the thatched roofs, and had become horribly thin under their winter coats, which they were shedding in tufts. Despite their destitution, the soldiers and officers continued to live as before. Now, too, though with pale and swollen faces and in tattered uniforms, the hussars formed ranks for roll call, maintained order, groomed their horses, polished their arms, hauled straw from the thatched roofs in a place of fodder, and gathered around the cauldrons for meals from which they rose hungry, joking about the vile food and their hunger, as always in their spare time. They lit bonfires before which they stripped and steamed themselves, smoked, picked out and baked sprouting, rotten potatoes, told and listened to stories of Potsdamin's and Surova's campaigns, or tales of Alyosha the trickster and Makolkolka the priest's workman. The officers, as usual, lived in 2s and 3s in the roofless, dilapidated houses. The senior officers took care of obtaining straw and potatoes, and the means of sustenance for the men generally. Junior officers spent their time, as always, at cards. Money was plentiful, if food was not, or at most in a caucus games such as quoits and scuttles. Little was said of the general course of the campaign in innocuous games, such as quoits and skittles. Little was said of the general course of the campaign, partly because nothing certain was known about it, partly because there was a vague feeling that in the main the war was going badly. Rostov lived as before with Denisov. The bond of friendship between them had grown still stronger since their furlough. Denisov never mentioned Rostov's family, but by the warmth of the friendship his commander showed him, Rostov felt that the elder hussar's ill-starred love for Natasha had to do something with bringing them closer. There was no doubt that Denisov tried to take care of Rostov and to expose him to danger as little as possible. After an engagement, he greeted his return with undisguised joy. On one of his expeditions to a deserted, devastated village, where he had been sent in search of supplies, Rostov found an elderly Pole and his daughter with an infant in arms. Starving and half-naked, they were too weak to get away on foot and had no means of obtaining transport. Rostov took them back with him and installed them in his own quarters, keeping them for several weeks while the old man was recovering. One of his comrades, talking of women, began to twit Rostov, saying that he was the slyest of them all, that it would not be half bad if he introduced them to the pretty little Polish woman he had rescued. Rostov took the joke as an insult, flared up, and said such disagreeable things to her that it was all Denisov could do to prevent a duel. When the officer had gone, and Denisov, who did not himself know what Rostov's relations with the Polish girl might be, began to reproach him for his quick temper. Rostov said to him, "But what do you expect? She's like a sister to me, and I can't tell you how it offended me. Just because." Denisov clapped him on the shoulder and commenced rapidly pacing the room without looking at Rostov, as was his way in moments of emotional excitement. "What a crazy breed you Wostos are," he muttered, and Rostov noticed that there were tears in his eyes. Thank you so much for watching and listening to this episode. Give it a thumbs up if you like it. Give it a thumbs down. Leave a comment below or subscribe or do nothing and keep watching. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.